Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. The Time Traveler series is Rob Oberst's first venture in historical fiction and his fifth book overall. Over the years, Rob progressively honed his craft by writing business strategies, articles, nonfiction books, and biographies. Similar to his other books, his latest novels in the Time Traveler series are packed with fascinating history and themes that translate to modern times, such as the parallels between our digital revolution and the 15th century's printing revolution that fostered the rapid spread of knowledge and similarly transformed the world. Rob does a masterful job of combining historical detail with the social and personal challenges and characters from this time. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce Rob Oberst.
Thank you, Pat. As Pat said, we'll be traveling back to the 15th century, to a time that's very different than ours, doesn't have all the technological capabilities that we have, but in a similar way, this is the time of a revolution too. Today we have the digital revolution, which has been going on for several decades. Back then, it was a printing revolution, which revolutionized the rest of the world. So I'd like to travel back to that time. And one of the things that I really enjoy in all the books I've written, which have come out in nonfiction books, is all the research that's involved, and enables me to travel back or forth in time. The previous books were actually looking in the future of the web and the future of our economy. This one's going back to a time which I think is a pretty interesting time. I hope you'll find it interesting too. So let me share my screen. And this is the Time Traveler, 1491. And if you kind of know it's your history, you remember that 1492 is a famous date. Well, that will be the second book. So this is kind of the first book in the series. And hopefully we'll have a second book. That really depends on if people are interested or not. And what we've normally done when we've had a book signing is we've had that at our bar, and we've had wine and beer and appetizers and cheese. And a couple of years ago, a couple of signings ago, I should say, we had a signing at the time of the Olympics, and that was in Brazil. And what we had for that was Capriano, which was a Brazilian drink. So if you have a glass, please enjoy yourselves. And also normally what's done in a reading or a presentation by a writer is they do a reading. Well, I was never a great reader. I think the last time that I really read much was in high school English class. Didn't have to do that in college English class. And even before that, during grade school, I was a third group reader out of 3 groups. So that wasn't very great. But at the same time, I wasn't that interested in school. I was always trying to get out of school and spend a lot of time in the principal's office. I thought at 6 years old, I had better things to do with my life. But shortly after that, I got really into reading. So rather than do that, I'd like to do a presentation. And I've done hundreds of presentations. So this is something that's more media that I'm used to. And this is the Time Traveler. Here's the cover. It took a while to develop this. At first, I started with a picture of Ireland on a sea blue background. And then that wasn't that interesting. So I added this curlicue, which symbolizes being transported back to Northern Ireland, to a bay on Northern Ireland, where the story takes place. And then that still wasn't that interesting. I'm not sure people understood what the curlicue is. So I looked for a guy that would be our hero going back to that time, and looked at a couple hundred graphics, found this guy and the back view of him, and he didn't have any clothes on. So my wife thought that wouldn't be a good idea. So I found some shorts online, put some shorts on, a belt, some shading, and some hair. So this is our guy. And then I also beveled the time traveler title and curved it, which kind of represents the curvature of the earth. So our hero, Rand Roberts, as the book opens, he's been working up to 12 hours a day, 7 days a week to develop this incredible world-changing app. And really kind of burned out by doing that. But they finally reached their goal. And it turns out that it's going to be a success. And part of their motivation has been that they were promised stock worth millions of dollars. So the actual app turns out to be a great success. Over a couple of weeks, they get millions of downloads. And then they're celebrating at the top of the Hilton overlooking Union Square and the rest of San Francisco, dancing in the night. And then the next night, he turns his phone off for the first time in 3 years and has a very relaxing night's sleep. Then he wakes up the next day, he's in his apartment overlooking San Francisco on the bay, and he's having a relaxing morning, drinking his coffee. Finally turns on his phone and he sees this message, and it says, "Rand, sorry, but we have to let you all go. Appreciate all you've done. Good luck, Steve." Well, so he's been laid off right after they get this. They haven't got the stock. And he does some research and finds out that Steve and the venture capitalists sold that for several hundreds of millions of dollars, making Steve and the venture capitalists very, very wealthy. He's burned out and depressed, not only for himself, but also for his team that worked so hard to create that great app. And they didn't get any stock either. So he's really bummed, depressed. 4 of his high school friends persuade him to go down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon to get away from it all and forget about it. And the bottom of the Grand Canyon's equivalent of going down 500 stories, or the equivalent of 100 Empire State Buildings. And down there, it's 2 billion years old. And 90% of it at the time was covered in water. The other 10% was the first continents that had just formed. And at that time, too, the moon was much closer. So I'm sure you've seen a harvest moon on the horizon. It looked like that all the time, except if it was down by the horizon, it would be much larger. And the only life at that time was blue-green algae, which were producing oxygen that led to the rest of all of us, the animals and human beings. And Rand also felt at the bottom this mysterious force pulling on him. He tried to ignore it, but it was kind of in the background as he was down there. So he, a group of rafters are there, and they're drinking some wine with a small group of his friends. And the next day, he wants to clear his head before they head out of the camp down at the bottom of Hermit's Trail. And he goes to look over the cliff at rapids, ends up slipping in, falling in. He's nearly drowned. He gets knocked out by a boulder, floats down for he doesn't know how long, and then eventually seeks shelter in a cave. The cave's dark, but he sees a light off in the distance around a curve. He goes in to look at it, and he's lured in by this mysterious lights. Then back there's a mysterious galvanic force that stretches and electrifies him and knocks him out. Next thing he knows, he wakes up in the bed of a beautiful maiden who's rescued him and is nursing him back to health. And in the background, he doesn't hear any cars, he doesn't hear any trucks. When he finally is able to reach the window, he looks out and he sees all these strange old-looking buildings and horses and carts, and sees people in medieval costumes. So he doesn't know what's going on. He's still kind of recovering and a little bit dizzy half the time. And he thinks maybe I'm in some kind of recreational village, such as Colonial Williamsburg, if you've ever been there, or in northeast Ohio, Hill Farm and Village, or perhaps some Amish town. Then he hears this rhythmic sound in the background. Throughout the day, as he's recovering, it takes him several days to recover, and he wonders what it's all about. So eventually he wanders down the hall, sees a door at the end, looks in, and there's like this shop there. And in the shop, there's these guys that are working on this strange machine, kind of feverishly. He has no idea what it is. And it turns out that it's the Gutenberg press, which was invented in 1450. And the first book that was ever printed on that press was the Bible. The Bible's two books, actually, the Old Testament, the New Testament, 1,200 pages with graphics and various fonts. So it's really a masterpiece. And it's amazing that Gutenberg was able to produce that. Now, that press was the only press until the mid-19th century. So that was the technology for 400 years. And it really was pretty fast for the time, which is why it lasted that long. And it could produce 200 lines per minute. My first job out of college was as a hospital consulting, working for Blue Cross. And at the time, the training program consisted of operating the mainframe, one of those ancient machines, kind of like the Gutenberg press, for a month on all the different shifts. And the first printer we had printed 600 lines per minute on that grain bar paper, if you can remember that ancient stuff. And then shortly after that, we had a 1,200 line per minute printer. But that's not all that much faster than this old Gutenberg press, which lasted so long. So the characters in the book are Rand Roberts, who is our hero, Gwendolyn McKieran, who rescues him, Michael McKieran, her father, and the printer that teaches him the printing profession is involved in this revolution. Marie, a bibliomatic French princess, and Reginald, who's kind of a evil knight that Rand ends up his antagonist. And as you can see, there's two triangles here between Rand, Marie, and Gwendolyn, and also Gwendolyn, Marie, and Reginald. And now you may recognize some of these characters, but I just want to say that none of them have signed up for the movie. Maybe they will, who knows? So at this time, we're just coming out of the Middle Ages. And kind of a theory in the book is the reason we're coming out of it is because of this new technology. And at the time, Europe had been mired in plagues, the Black Plague, and as many as half of the people in Europe would die with these plagues. And there was also wars going on everywhere. Many of the countries hadn't formed yet, and there was just wars between all these feudal districts constantly. And in some ways, it doesn't sound any different than today. I don't think the United States has gone more than 5 years without being in some kind of a war. So Europe was late to the printing party. And also they had, up until that time, was vellum or parchment. Now, vellum is made from cow hides, and parchment is made from sheep or goat hides. So you can imagine if you were writing a book, you need a lot of cattle hides or sheep hides, and maybe they weren't in a lot of demand, so you certainly couldn't print a lot of books. So you'd have to kill a lot of cattle, a lot of sheep, a lot of goats to do that. And it was extremely expensive to do so. So there was these emerging technology, which is a theme of the book that I found very interesting. And it's paper technology and printing technology. And those two together would lead to vastly more books, which would lead to a vast spread of knowledge, which would lead to vast increases in the civilization of the countries and the nations that got into this. So let's take a look at paper technology first. And paper goes back to 150 BC in China. They found shards of actual paper, plus or minus 100 years. We're not exactly sure. But then I found this odd. They figured that uh, paper technology was acquired by the Moors in 794, exactly 794. And the reason for that was the Battle of Talas, in and around Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan. Um, and they, as part of the reparations of the war, inherited paper technology. And then the Moors took over most of the Mediterranean area, and papermaking technology ended up in Spain around 1056 or so. And then it didn't hit Europe, really the rest of Europe, for 350 years. So it wasn't until 1400 AD that Europe could make paper. Before that, they were just using vellum to print on, or parchment. So let's take a look at print technology too. And China was the first to have print technology around 200 AD or so. Then the Moors, again, after that Battle of Talas, they acquired the technology to do printing. And then it was another 650 years before Germany and the rest of Europe really had much in the way of printing technology. Again, the Gutenberg press. So let's look back about to the year 1000, about 1,000 years ago. And at that time, the leading civilization was the Moor civilization. And they had this printing technology, they had paper, and they were the leader in math. The Arabs invented algebra. They were the leader in science, had many scientific advances, which led to better war-making capabilities. They're also the leader in literature. One library in Cordoba, Spain, controlled by the Moors, was actually the capital of Spain at the time, had 500,000 books, which was far more than the rest of Europe combined. And that was only one library. That city had many libraries, as did the rest of the country. They were a leader in astronomy and also a leader in commerce. And if there are any accountants out there, you can imagine trying to do your accounting on cow hides or goat hides, something like that. So the paper led to vastly more complex commerce and business transactions that could be reported, and they had much broader spread of commerce. Europe had an advantage, though. The Chinese had 50,000 characters, and you could imagine when they started printing, the way they did that, you'd take a block and then you'd carve out all these Chinese characters on a page, and then you'd stamp it. But imagine if you're halfway through that process of carving all those letters and you proof it and you made a mistake. I don't know how they do that. I don't think they had any white out. Maybe there's some kind of wood compound they used. I don't know. So, but that was very difficult to do. And it was similar for the Arabs because their characters overlap. So all they could use was these print blocks, carving things into it. And hopefully they didn't make any mistakes or they'd have to start all over and carve a whole block. But the Roman alphabet, which Europe was using, only had 36 characters, so they could have interchangeable type, which gave them a huge advantage. And this technology spread like wildfire. So it started in Germany, where there were dozens of printers, and then spread to Spain, where there were spread to Italy, where there were similarly dozens of printers, and then to France, and then to Northern Europe, Finland, Denmark, Belgium, countries like that. And finally, it spread to the UK or Britain, which was the last one to acquire printing technology. And then a theme of the book is it follows the first printer in Ireland, which would be the second printer in the British Isles. So by 1490, 150 cities had printers, and they might have more than one printer in the city. And they were producing 10 million books a year. At the time, Europe had 60 million people, and probably only 1 out of 10, or maybe 1 out of 20 people could read. So if you were there, you were able to get a book or more a year, and they were vastly cheaper now because of the print technology than they were just with monks transcribing day after day, week after week, month after month to create a book or two. So theme of the book again is that this is a revolution similar to the digital revolution of today. And you probably remember Moore's law, probably don't remember exactly what it is, but it was created by Gordon Moore, one of the three founders of Intel. And they were the first to make chips. And they could fit, kept on doubling the number of transistors on a chip every year or two. And that law held for 55 years. Some people think that that expired a couple of years ago. Some people think that maybe it has another year or two to survive. But there's also some new technologies that physics are developing that might lead to a longer life for the law. But right now we've got about 2.7 trillion transistors on a little chip, similar to what's in your phone. Then there's Ober's law, and I say this tongue-in-cheek because I'm certainly no Gordon Moore. But I wrote the first book I wrote was about the web, the future of the web 20 years ago. It was entitled 2020 Web Vision, which is kind of interesting considering what happened last year. And it said that the number of web pages would double every 6 to 12 months. Originally, at the time, the web was 10 years old and it doubled every 6 months. And more recently, it's been 9 months and probably 12 months out in the future. Now that's held for 30 years. And according to Google, by now, even though they haven't really kept track of this for 3 or 4 years, we have about 110 quadrillion web pages, which is enough for 5 or 10,000 pages for every person on the face of the earth. Now, I'd also like to propose Gutenberg's law, which says that the number of books doubles every 2 years. And as of this time, back in 1491, that law had held for 40 years, and there were a total of 2 million books. Now, the story isn't just about this digital revolution. It's not just about printing. There's a lot of other things going on there relative to history. And I think it's a very interesting story that looks into these characters and what it's like for this guy to go back to that time. And it may be great for him, but he may also long for our current time. So because of this printing technology, civilization spread from China to the Moorish areas, to Spain, to Germany, and eventually to Britain. And up across the top, I have the areas that the Moors conquered, which extends from India and Pakistan up to Afghanistan and Iran and Iraq, Saudi Arabia, across northern Africa to Spain, and it also included parts of Italy like Sicily and Sardinia, the islands there, and even into parts of France. So they really conquered a huge area, and they had a very advanced civilization. Now, the first English printer was William Caxton. And he printed his first book in 1475. He learned printing in Cologne, Germany, and he coined 1,500 words. So William was originally a merchant, a very successful merchant that dealt across northern Europe, northwestern Europe. And he got into this technology, similar to a Bill Gates or a Zuckerberg. This is really something that he was passionate about. And coining the 1,500 words, I often thought, how great would that be to be able to do that myself? Now, I'd like to do that, but unfortunately, those who read my books probably wouldn't enjoy it if I kept on creating words that they didn't really understand. Now, he was sponsored by the Queen Mom, Margaret, which was instrumental in founding the Tudor dynasty. It was really all her idea. And part of the Tudor dynasty included her son, Henry VII, Henry VIII, her grandson, her great-granddaughters, Mary Queen of Scots and Elizabeth I. So it was a pretty successful dynasty for England. It's really when England became a prominent country. Before that, it was really a backwater. And here are the first English books: the Recall and History of Troy, which is the Odyssey and the Iliad. He did that in 1475. The next year, he printed a book called The Game and Play of Chess. And it really wasn't really just about chess, but how chess applies to your life and your strategy in life. Then he wrote the Dictates and Sayings of the Philosophers in 1477, followed by Chaucer's Canterbury Tales somewhere around 1478. Now, the first two books were produced in Belgium, in Bruges, Belgium, and the last two were produced in London, in England, the first time that was ever done. Now, the Dictates and Sayings of the Philosophers, his first book, included all the great philosophers of the time, including Homer and Hermes, Solon, who founded democracy, Hippocrates of the Hippocratic Oath, Pythagoras of the Pythagorean theory, Diogenes, who looked for an honest man, Ptolemy, who said that the planets rotated around the sun about 1,000 years before Galileo figured that out, Socrates, who taught Plato, who taught Aristotle, who taught Alexander, who was a world conqueror and also a philosopher, and then many others. Some of these philosophers he added to the previous works. Now, there's an arc of translation that occurred to get to that English book that goes way back to 500 BC to those famous Greek philosophers, which were carried forward by the Romans, and they added their own philosophers and translated that into Latin, which was further translated into Arabic, and along with some of the philosophers they had, then translated from Arabic to Spanish, then to French, and finally to English. So in about 1,000 years later. So you kind of wonder if each step of this arc of translation didn't exist, would we still have those philosophers that you might have studied in college or on your own reading? Maybe some of their philosophies would have been lost without that arc of translation. So some of these books are extremely valuable. History of Troy sold for $2 million. Chaucer's Canterbury Tales sold for $11.2 million in today's dollars. And Gutenberg's Bible, just one of them, sold for $12 million. So both of them together could have sold for $24 million. And all of that would be worth about $37 million. So just 4 books, which you could carry in a child's backpack, could be worth $37 million. Many times their weight of gold, 100 times their weight of gold. So our hero Rand kind of thinks if I can acquire these books and take them back to my time, they'd be worth a fortune. In mint shape, maybe up to $70 million. So that's his plan. He wants to be able to do that, figure out a way to get back to his time, take these books with him, and then what he wants to do is get to work on that second, hire all his team members back, give them stock, and have them develop an app that's even more spectacular than the one that they developed before. So that's the end of the presentation. I greatly appreciate any feedback you care to share. And also, I greatly appreciate your review. It really helps the book. So with that, if there's any question or comments, I'd like to hear those. And we'll do that on a separate recording. This one's getting a little bit